Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name is Leah Beatty. I'm Gary's daughter, and today I will be teaching you about grafting, the different methods that I've used and the different successes I've had with each graft and different fruit trees and the time of year to do it. So I'll start with why should we graft? There's a few reasons that people graft now, especially for like garden centers and the backyard. One reason is to get a certain variety that you want. If a lot of trees, like say an avocado tree, is grown from a seed, it could take many years for it to start producing fruit because it wants to grow and get bigger the first few years. But if you were to graft a smaller tree or a known variety of an already fruiting tree, so like this is the Jan Boyce avocado scion attached to a seedling avocado that we just ate the fruit and then planted the seed. So you don't really know what the bottom seedling part fruit is going to actually be like, if it comes true to seed or it could have variation from the mother, from the fruit that you ate. And then the scion part is from a known variety called Jan Boyce, which you know what kind of fruit you're going to get. And it's from a tree that's already been producing for many years. So if you do attach that scion, which is the stick from the mother tree, onto the seedling, which is the rootstock, then you'll get the Jan Boyce to grow when attaching it to the seedling avocado. So that's one reason why we do that. Another reason would be for hardiness, like if you want something that's more cold tolerant or heat tolerant for your area that you live in. One example is the cherimoya and the sugar apple. So they do have to be related, the plants that you graft onto each other in the same family, but there are different variations of each family. So for example, the cherimoya plant, it's that big custard-like fruit, real creamy inside, and those grow very well here. However, the sugar apple, which is a relative, is more tropical and more cold sensitive. And so I've grown them from seed before, but after like taking them out of the greenhouse and planting them in my yard, I live in Santa Ana, they died back quite a bit in the wintertime because they just can't handle the cold here. So now one of my friends, Ashok, who's a good customer, he has brought me a sugar apple grafted to a cherimoya so that the cherimoya is stronger and can handle the cold. And when the sugar apple scion is grafted to it, that makes it stronger and able to survive the winters here. So that's another reason why some people want to graft if they want to get more cold sensitive plants that are acquired to like, there's also like Ilama fruits, there's pink sugar apples, white sugar apples, all different types that some are sweeter as well. Sour sops, guanabanas. That's another relative of the cherimoya that is cold sensitive. So we've been grafting and I've been experimenting at my house what works and what doesn't work. So this one was grafted maybe about a month and a half ago, and you can tell that it's taking because it's starting to leaf out of the grafting tape.
So you're saying the cherimoya is more cold hardy
Yes.
than the sugar apple?
Yes. Yeah, so the cherimoya helps kind of protect whatever is grafted onto it from dying in the winter. Another reason to graft is to be more efficient with spacing. So like some people want many varieties of, let's say, like apples. One thing we sell are the 6 different grafted espalier apple trees. And there's 6 different varieties. So you get like a red one, a green one, a yellow one, all different colors and flavors on one tree. And then they just grow it out like along a wall or make a fence out of it. And that's another way. Some problems that you can run into is if there's a variety that's more vigorous than others, can take over. So with most grafted fruit trees, you want to make sure that you tend to the tree, make sure one's not taking over, like growing more vigorously and shading out the others or overgrowing the others. So some might need more trimming than others, so that the less vigorous varieties have a chance to get enough energy to start growing on their own as well. Same with avocado trees. Some people want A and B varieties to cross-pollinate. And so if you do have 2 or 3 grafted, you can have different fruiting at different times, and then the different flowers that cross-pollinate each other so that you have it all on one tree. It's much easier. But then again, you have to always check on your grafts to make sure that one isn't overtaking the other grafts and giving more energy to that one. So to prevent them from taking over, sometimes you just have to trim them up, like the tips and the side branches, to give more sun to the other varieties. Don't let it shade it out, or else the other varieties won't grow as fast. And sometimes if they fail, the trees are very forgiving, so it'll just keep branching out and you can try again. But Gary always says if you don't want to lose certain varieties and some take over, just plant 2 or 3 of the trees in the same hole, but different varieties. So that's another way if you give up on grafting, but but don't give up because it's super fun. Like yeah, it does take a lot of practice. One of our employees, my coworker Alan, he has been experimenting with this fig tree, which is, we call it the Frankenfig, because he's been grafting all sorts of varieties onto this one fig. So you can see the fruits, like there's a black fruit here, and then there's some still not mature, like turn kind of reddish green fruits, and then these are green, and he's marked on each one. Col des Dames Noires, I-258, Strawberry Verte. So he's done this to see how many figs he can fit onto one plant, which right now it looks like he's got maybe about 8 different varieties. Some of them it looks like he just did, and it's starting to grow. And then some of them, there's a few that have shriveled up and dried, so they didn't take. And some other varieties are harder to root, just a cutting. So that's why a lot of roses are grafted, because some roses that were grown from seed, they want to keep those traits, but they don't root as a cutting as easily as some stronger varieties. So that's another reason why they would graft it onto a rootstock, so that ones that are harder to root into the ground, you can grow them by grafting and you'll get those traits that you want. So the grafts that I've been most successful with, that I've been experimenting with for quite a few years, maybe 6-7 years now. I started out with the Cleft graft, which is pretty simple. So you have the seedling tree and you chop it in half and you do a cut down the center, so it's like an open V, and then you take the tree that you want to grow onto that, called the scion, and you cut it in a puzzle piece shape to fit that same V. So then once these are connected, you want to make sure that when you graft them, that the side of the two joints are touching each other. It's called the precambrium outside layer. So that's the most important thing, is to make sure that on one side they match, at least. Sometimes if you're lucky, you'll get both sides. You'll get the perfect match to your scion that will match perfectly. But if you don't, it's okay to have a smaller scion grafting to a larger, thicker seedling rootstock, as long as one side you match up. And I'll be doing some examples and showing how that works. I've been doing that for quite a few years. And then my friend Kevin from Bare Root Nation, he taught me the whip and tongue graft. So whip and tongue is similar, but you do another cut in the center. So it's like it's better to show you it. I will show you what it looks like in real life than drawing it. But you pretty much do the same thing here, but you shave off the side so that you have more like 4 points of contact rather than 2 with each side of the stick. So I'll be demonstrating that whip and tongue graft. Another one I did last year with my persimmon tree is I experimented with a bud graft. And the bud graft is taking a piece of the bud wood from a tree. So like that, say that's a bud, you cut it out, and then on the rootstock, you make a slit on the outside where a bud used to be and replace it with a bud that you want. And that one, I forgot to print the picture out, but I can show you after the class of my persimmon tree that took. You can see where I inserted the bud, and then it started to grow a branch out from that bud onto the rootstock. That's bud graft.
That way you make like a T-cut.
Yes.
Insert the bud.
Yep. Yeah, T-cut. And this is cleft. Cleft graft.
What are the success rates for the different type of grafts?
Well, it kind of depends. Like, I did have more success with this, but then at the same time, I also started using buddy tape instead of parafilm. So when I first started grafting, I used the parafilm tape. It's hard to find that online. Now it might be easier, but a few years ago it was hard. I would go to Orange County Farm Supply. They would carry it. It was just a few dollars. Cheap, easy, it's stretchable, so you can wrap it around the stick easily. But then a lot of advanced grafters started talking about the buddy tape, which it's very expensive. So we sell it here for $60, but it is 70 feet long. And I've had mine for over 2 years now, and it still has some left. It looks like that. So it does last a long time. And we sell the perforated ones. So they're perforated pretty perfectly to wrap one stick. And so you don't waste too much, and it's just easy to detach. You don't need scissors or anything.
That's right. Too.
Yeah, and this stretches a lot very well. And it's supposed to be, I guess, more breathable, but doesn't let in too much moisture or air to protect the graft, and then the buds come out very easily too. Once they start to grow, they can break through this, so you don't have to remove it. Same with the parafilm. I never had problems with it, but it was a little more stiff, so you have to pull harder. This one's very pliable and easier to wrap, I think. But yeah, you want to be careful not to waste it because it is more pricey. So that one is called Buddy Tape. Oops, Buddy Tape, and another one was Parafilm. So Buddy Tape and Parafilm. In some areas where it's more tropical and humid, they don't even use anything to wrap the scion with. They just put a rubber band around the union so that it keeps it together. But here, sometimes it can be pretty dry and hot. And so I use this not only to protect the scion from drying out, but I use it to like kind of shield the stem from the sun. If you're not going to cover or shade your tree, or it doesn't have foliage to shade the graft, then this I think protects it a little bit better. Or you can put like a little paper bag over the graft. If it's really sunny and the sun is hitting your graft directly, there's no other way to cover it, then I just put a paper bag over it for a few weeks, just to make sure it can unite with the stick, and then uncover it after a few weeks so that it can acclimate to the sun.
If you can keep it out of the sun, like the little avocado that you showed earlier, is it best when after you do the graft to keep it in a
I keep it
area?
Yeah, I keep it like under other trees, like filtered sun, or if you have a little greenhouse that's not like, it's kind of protected 50%, then that's fine to have open inside the greenhouse. Before grafting, especially if you're a beginner grafter, I highly recommend, well, you have to. It's mandatory to wear gloves, because I've already learned my lesson a few times, and I don't recommend anyone should try to learn a lesson the hard way. So another helpful tip is to, if you don't have gloves, definitely wrap Band-Aids on your fingers. So the finger that is opposite of your dominant hand, where you'll be slicing. So I'm right-handed, so sometimes I just pre-wrap my index finger with Band-Aids right where the slices go. So you could do one around your fingertip and then one covering this side for extra protection, because that's where I always cut myself. And I always wear gloves now, because there's another grafting method called approach grafting, which I was trying to do with a more mature tree. And that's where you have a tree in the ground, and then you want to graft another variety to it. For example, I had mine in a pot, and so I put them next to each other, and then the branches, I was trying to make them touch so that, and I was cutting it so that the Precambrium layers were touching, and it was very difficult, harder than I thought, and I was rushing, and I wasn't wearing gloves, and I nearly chopped my finger off. But luckily my nail stopped the blade. I was using a box cutter, and so I only lost nerve feelings, but it's almost back. So your fingers do grow back. Just don't cut them off completely, and be very careful when doing more mature trees, because it's harder to cut the wood, and sometimes it can just slip and you could lose a limb. So be very careful on more mature grafting trees, because when it's harder and you're pushing harder, you want to make sure your fingers aren't in that line of cut, so you are safe. So one day when I'm brave enough, I'll be doing approach grafting again, but with more protection and maybe younger trees to practice on. So gloves, I just wear the left-hand glove when I'm grafting because you don't really chop, and your your dominant hand that you're cutting with isn't really in danger. So just the one that's on the opposite end of the cut, you want to make sure you have a glove or band-aids on. And I like to pre-wrap the scions before I place them in and tie them to the rootstock, so that while you're wrapping it, it's not moving around on the rootstock section. I'm going to move this so we can do some demonstrations.
Scion, is it better to use the tip, which is like a softer wood, or could you use like a harder wood with scion?
I've done both. So the question is, for the scion wood, a softer wood like the tip, or harder, more mature wood for grafting. I've been using both. I've found that for like avocados and mangoes, it's easier, and I've had a lot of success using the fresh new growth, grafting onto the mature wood. When you do graft, it's best to try and graft as close to the main branch as possible. Like this one, you can tell there's barely any space. We cut it all the way down to 3 inches and then put the scion wood right here. And the reason for that is because if you ever want to trim your tree, you don't want to be cutting off any grafts that you had already made. And if, say, like you grafted an avocado or a tree all the way at the very tip, then the grafted part is going to grow really vigorously, and it could weigh down the branch that it's grafted to if it's not sturdy enough. So like for an avocado or any fruit tree, really, I would start the graft as close as possible to the trunk right here. And then there's no risk of trimming off the graft that you made. So we can start with, let's try this avocado. So this avocado we grew from a seed. This is the Zutano rootstock. And this one, yeah, I guess the graft didn't take, so it just grew out the Zutano branches. And so we're going to graft a known variety. I brought out a Nabal avocado that we can graft onto this rootstock. So sometimes before I start chopping it, I try to make sure that there's a branch thick enough or around the same size as the rootstock to start grafting to. And I like to use pruners. I cleaned these already. I have a lot of these sanitary wipes, and I just carry them around with me because like some trees like figs and mangoes, they leak a lot of sap. And so after each cut, to wash off the sticky sap, I just use a disinfecting wipe to wipe the pruners so that it doesn't get all sticky and the sap doesn't spread from tree to tree. And you can use that also on your grafting knives. So this is the grafting knife I've started out with. I think I got it on Amazon. And it's called, it's a stainless steel Zen Garden, which is nice because it has 2 different blades, a curved one and a straight one, but honestly I never use the curved one. It's just kind of awkward to use, so I always use the straight one. But then my friend Ashok gave me this knife that he uses, which is called the Opinel, Opinel, Opinel. This one's number 6. They have different numbers. And this one now is my favorite because it's more safe. So there's a little twisty section where it blocks it so it doesn't close if you're grafting and something happens, it could close on you. This one, that won't happen because you can twist like a safety piece on so it doesn't move around. So I like that a lot. And then it's kind of child-proof because then you can twist it back and lock it, and then you can't open it.
What is that?
Open Now grafting knife, OPINEL. And this is the number 6. They have different numbers. I think it's like the length of the blade. So this one I found to work perfectly. And the grafting tape, we will start with chopping the rootstock. So I'm going to make a chop down here. And sometimes if they branch out lower, then you can either graft onto those or cut them off so that the one that you graft up here has more energy to push out the new growth. So sometimes it's really hard to chop off this beautiful lush new growth, but it's always better to chop down low so that you never trim off your graft. So from the scion wood on this is already a grafted tree, so this we know for sure is a Nabal avocado. I'm going to take off the most thickest branch to align with this one, and it could be a little thinner. And it's also good to see buds starting to form on the tips of the scions, because then you know that it's ready to grow and push out new leaves right after it's attached to the main scion or main rootstock. So I'm going to take this, and I've now trimmed this so it will get bushier. So for this, some people do really big cuttings. I've been experimenting with both, and I found that the smaller it is, the easier it is for it to take to its union. So, I grew I grew a persimmon tree from a seed, and that one, it had tons of branches all over it. So that was my experimental tree. And during bare root season, we get all the different varieties of persimmons in, like 5 or 6 different varieties. So when my dad starts trimming them for the bare root orders, I collect the sticks, and then I experiment and graft on all my trees at home. And the persimmon tree, I experimented different grafting methods. I used some scions that were like a foot long, and then I did some that were just a few inches, and then the one that was a bud graft. And the bud graft looks really sturdy because it's just a tiny little nub that you graft on, but now it's a whole branch, about maybe 18 inches, and it grew very fast. So those have a lot of energy, and I think there's less chance of it to get messed up and separate from the wood when it's trying to unite with it. And then I noticed with some of the longer branches, the foot-long branches that I did, half of it died out and dried up, but the bottom, like 1 or 2 nodes survived. So I think that if it's too big, it might dry out faster or not have enough energy to unite all the way with the rootstock. So a smaller, like 2 or 3 node cutting might be more successful than like a bigger branch. But bigger branches, I did have a few take, and so they still did well, and they're still growing. But some of them did die back, and the smaller ones were all more successful than the larger ones.
This is my citrus tree. How important is the timing? Do you want to do it like way before it starts to leaf back out, or right before it's going to leaf back out, or?
That's a good question. So for deciduous trees, I did my grafting in January and February when it was dormant, and I've had probably like 80% take, and so they did pretty well. I did cherry trees and the persimmon tree, and apple trees. The apples, they all took 100%. So I have 4 different grafts on my apple. So those, I think apples are really good to start with because they're easier. The wood is a little bit more pliable as well. On the cherry trees, it was a little bit more harder, thicker wood. So that one's a little more difficult, but they still took pretty well. You just have to make bigger cuts in the union area. And then for the mangoes and more tropical avocado trees, citrus, it's better to do it in a warmer climate. So like these mangoes, I did probably around April and May, but I had them in the greenhouse to keep them warm. And now this time of year, the grafts are okay to do outside as long as it's like morning sun or filtered sun or protected under the canopy of the foliage. Because then if you do it in the winter, it will just sit there. There's not that much growth in the tropical plants. So you want to do it when they're growing more vigorously, which is when it starts to heat up. And like May, June, I think is ideal when they push out the most growth. They'll have more success combining with their union. Okay, so I'm going to wrap the scion. I always wrap it first, right after I take the cut. So you want to get a firm grip on it and do a little stretch before you start wrapping so that it sticks to itself. The more you stretch it, the more stickier it becomes, so it can attach and hold on to the other side of it, if that makes sense. So as I twist it around the branch, I pull it and I turn it, and I have a pretty firm grip on both the stick and the tape. Oops, sometimes it breaks, but you can just reattach it. So just pull and twirl. So when you're wrapping the buddy tape and the parafilm, it will look like clear. You can barely tell that it's covering it because it's so clear colored. If it's really cloudy white like the original strip, then you're just not pulling it tight enough. It's okay to have it, like, you don't want it to be too loose because you don't want any air to get in or moisture that could cause like mold or mildew inside the graft. And you want it to be thin enough so that the buds can push out. So this one took it all the way down to where I'm going to start cutting. And so one buddy piece tape should cover a pretty good 6-inch, 8-inch scion.
You always start from the top to the bottom, or
you don't have to. You could. It might be better sometimes to start from the bottom and go to the top, so then you can easily secure, I guess, totally cover the very tip so it doesn't dry out. And then, yeah, either way, starting from bottom or starting from top. I always just start from the top. It's just a habit I formed. Okay, so now, very important is to put your gloves on. Wrong hand. Opposite of your dominant hand. And then sometimes if you have a scion that was shipped to you or it's been dried out for like a few hours, you can't graft it right away. I always wrap it up and then put it in like a wet paper towel with a bag over it to keep it from drying out while I'm waiting to find a good rootstock to graft to. And if you do have one that looks a little dry on the end, I just make a fresh cut right before I graft it onto the seedling. Okay, so now I'm going to take my grafting knife and twist and secure it. And it doesn't matter which one you start with, so I'll start with the rootstock side. I'm going to do the whip and tongue graft. So for that, you start shaving off one side So you kind of have to hold it pretty firm, and then you cut up like that. So one side is shaven, and you want it to be pretty straight when you look at it so that it can match and line up with the scion. And I'm going to do the same thing to the scion side. There's one cut on the outside. And then the next step is to make a cut right down the middle. Well, sometimes I don't do it right in half. I try to keep it closer to where I shaved off the side so that it's easier to slide the scion side into it. You don't want it to be too thick because it could break open the scion. So, and this is the part where you really need gloves because you're holding it in place. So I'm starting as close to the edge as I can, a very eighth of an inch in to the next to the side of the plant, and I kind of just teeter its way down slowly so that you have control and it doesn't go too far. You see, that's where the blade hits your hand. And so now you can see there's shaven and then a gap to insert. So you have 1, 2, 3 points where it's touching this one. So this one, the scion, you're going to do the same exact cut, kind of towards the shaven part and slice down. And I go about an inch, looks like about an inch down, and you want to try to do the same on the rootstock side. And then this part is easier when I take off my gloves, and it helps if you have fingernails, or sometimes you can use the tip of the blade if it's like really hard on the scion to kind of pry it open, and then slide the scion into the rootstock. So this is a little bit smaller than the rootstock side, so I'm going to pick which side looks like it's going to line up the best. So you can kind of examine and see how the cut is made, which side looks like it will match up and be straight on the Precambrium layer, which is the outside bark. So when I slide it in, I make sure to hold it so that it slides in and the edges match perfectly. And then I just hold it tight while I get the buddy tape to wrap around it. So that is what it should look like. And there's always enough room to redo your cut. If you feel like it doesn't match up good enough, then you can always make a new cut.
So you're saying you have a good match of the Cambrian layer on the nearest side, but not a good match on the other side.
Yeah. So see, on that side it's sticking out a lot, but on this side it's perfectly flush as you can get it. Sometimes I wiggle it around a little bit so you can see and make sure that it lines up perfectly. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. So always make sure that I'm satisfied with the alignment before I wrap the union part. And what I've been doing with the buddy tape is I've been doubling it for the union instead of using a rubber band, because I used to try to do the rubber band, but I feel like as I was wrapping and trying to secure the rubber band, it was wiggling the scion too much. And I was afraid that it wasn't going to line up properly, because it's hard to see after you wrap it if it's lined up the same way it was when you first put it in. So for the buddy tape, I had a lot of success now after double layering it. And then I like to start at the bottom a little bit, like a ½ inch below where the cuts are, so that I can cover them completely. And I take a firm grip on the bottom rootstock. I pull it, and then I do one wrap so that it's holding itself on. And then before I start wrapping the top layer, I give it a really good squeeze so it's super tight before I start wrapping again. So I hold it and then wrap so that there's no air gaps in between the union. So you want to make sure that you're squeezing really tight all the way when you wrap it the whole time, pretty much. And you don't want it to wiggle or move around. So I just use the rest of the buddy tape and I hold it down as much as possible. And then the more you stretch it, the easier it is to stick to itself. And so once it's finished, I just kind of press it into the side so that it sticks to itself, and then that's all I do. I don't put any more wraps around it. But you can, like on here, you can see Alan does the rubber bands. So on this one, he wraps some rubber band around this one. And then the rubber bands, as they expand, they break themselves off and fall off by themselves. You don't really have to do it. You do want to be careful. So you always want to make sure that you tag if you want to remember what you grafted. Tag or write on the pot what you grafted. The tags that I recommend, and we sell them here, are the aluminum, or they make copper tags that when you write on the label, it imprints itself. So even if it's like a pencil or a pen and it can fade, once you write on it, it will dent the aluminum, so there's always a mark. You can tell what you wrote, even if it fades off. So I'll write on one of these and pass it around so you can see how that works. You can write the name and then the date if you want to remember when it was grafted. And then they come with a metal wire to tie it to the tree. But you want to be careful as the tree grows to make sure the wire doesn't girdle the branch, because as the branches thicken, and if this is really tight, sometimes it'll girdle the branch, or the branch will just grow right over it, and then you can never get it out. It'll just grow into the tree. So I usually start it like right where I grafted, give it a little twist, but not too permanent, just in case the tree grows and you need to move the tag so that it's on a thinner branch. And now you remember what you grafted. So we can pass the tree around. Oh, let me show the camera. So that's the name on the tree. I'll take the weeds out.
Before the grafters started using parafilm or the buddy tape, what did they use to wrap around the?
So before parafilm and buddy tape, my dad said when he tried grafting when he was younger, he would just use like a plastic bag, any plastic, to make like a little greenhouse around the scion to keep it from drying out, but don't let too much air in. And then some, like when we get in our avocados that are grafted, I think they're grown in a greenhouse first, so all they do is put a rubber band around the union. They don't wrap the sticks, and that's probably because they do mass grafting. They don't have time to wrap each individual scion. They do thousands of trees a day, so that takes up too much time. But for the homeowner, if you want more success with your one stick, then it's good to take a little extra care to wrap it, make sure it takes for sure. And you can do multiple grafts. So like this is a mango, and I grafted a sweet tart and a Jahangir scion. to one seedling. And so every time I eat a mango, I save the seed and I plant it so that I can graft different varieties onto one. And some seedlings I just keep because it could be yummy, better, or not as good as the mother. And if it is really good, then I just keep the seedling. And if I have room, I can graft other varieties onto it that I know for sure what type of fruit it's going to be. Another reason for grafting is some trees need a cross-pollinator. So like the coffee cake persimmon and the chocolate persimmon, the one that's more round, I think it's the chocolate persimmon, if it's not cross-pollinated with the coffee cake, then it is very bitter and inedible. So we always recommend to grow them together if you want sweet fruit. And this one, I am going to do the bud graft demonstration because that's the most success I've had at my house with the persimmon tree. And these need a little pruning anyways. So I could do one on each. So then this tree becomes two. When I attach the bud wood of this tree onto this tree, I can just swap buds. And then you'll get a 2-in-1 persimmon. So sometimes before you graft, it's easier to just trim them so you have more area to graft. It's more accessible. So this is the coffee cake persimmon. And I'm going to keep these buds. And then this is the chocolate persimmon. And I like to cut the tip so it promotes more inner branching, and then they get sturdier and grow stronger too. So I always trim my trees before I start grafting them. And then the new growth that they grow for the rest of the summer is the growth that's going to hold the next year's fruit. So that's why we prune our trees in the summertime, so that it grows vigorously, shorter and lower and more accessible. And that growth is what will be the fruiting growth for next year. Okay, so after grafting the avocado, I'm going to sterilize the grafting knife and the pruners with the little disinfecting wipes. Just in case there's any bacteria on the branches, it helps prevent any contamination when you graft your new tree. And sometimes if it's real sappy, like figs, they leak a lot of white stuff. At the end, I like to use either Lime Away or the CLR cleaner. That's what I use just to clean them so that it gets any sticky stuff off and rust that has formed. Okay, so for the bud growth, I take off the leaf because it's covering the buds where you want to graft. In the wintertime, it's easier because there's no foliage, so you can see where it's going to grow. And usually the buds become a new branch when they grow. So I like to pick a spot that's pretty firm, because when I cut it, it's going to be a pretty deep cut. So you want to make sure that it's easy to cut. The thinner branches are too hard. You might just chop the whole branch off. So let's do one right here. You can see underneath the leaf there's a little node there. That's a bud that will potentially be a branch in the future, especially if I transfer a bud from this tree to that tree. So I'm going to try to find one that's similar in size. I try not to do like the main trunk, just in case I mess up. I don't want to kill the whole tree. So I do a little bit higher, but you want it to be somewhere where if you do trim the tree, it's not in your trimming zone. You don't take off your bud graft.
So in this case, are you looking more for the hardwood section?
Yeah, on the persimmon, I'm looking for a more firm hardwood. It's easier to cut and I think has a better chance. But it could work. I haven't tried it yet on the newer growth. It's just smaller and harder to do it. You have to be really, really careful not to break anything, like the branch. So I'm going to transfer this bud, and I'm just going to take my knife and cut right above the bud. And then do the same type of cut I did like on the whipping tongue on the side. So you can see now I have taken off a bud. You just kind of got to teeter it off so you don't rip it. You don't want to rip this the outside bark off.
And you can do this while the tree is dormant or in the middle of summer active.
It's probably better in the winter while it's dormant, because then it wakes up and starts to grow. But this is my first time trying it in the summer, so I'll let you know if it works. So now we have the little bud. And I'm going to do one more scrape on the outside. So when I insert it into this tree, it will match on the inside and on the outside. So I'm just slipping it in just like the whipping tongue. I want to make sure it looks pretty straight and not lumpy on both sides. So now has a cut on the outside and the inside, like that. So, and remember, this is my chocolate. I'm going to attach it to the coffee cake. Oh, keep on the glove. So this bud, I'm going to do this same thing, but I'm going to replace it with that. So I make the cut. I don't make it quite as long. I just cut the bud right off so that there's still a little opening pocket that I can slip this one into. So this one you can see there's a little section here, like that's open, like an open V. And then this side you just slide in where you took out that bud. And again, you want the outside Precambrium layer to match. And this one, it's sticking out a little bit more than I want, so I'm just going to cut it a little bit deeper so it slides in more. Okay, so now you can see, you can come up after, before, so I won't wrap it, so you can see how I slid the bud into where the old bud was and just kind of replaced it. And sometimes you might need to adjust and scrape off a little more if it's not matching.
If you're working with a small bud, it seems like it's easy to damage the bud when you're handling it.
Yeah, you do have to be really careful because it is more small and delicate. But it does match really nicely when you cut it out like that. So hopefully it's a little more successful. And then after I attach the bud, I wrap the entire bud and where it's cut with the buddy tape. But I'll leave this open so you can see what it looks like before I wrap it. But yeah, so this is open and then you would want to wrap it to protect it and keep it closed. I would probably do a double layer again of the buddy tape. So I'll leave that for everyone to see. I don't know if the camera can see. It is right there. Okay.
So how long does it take the graft, that type of graft to take hold as opposed to Cleft?
It's about the same time for my persimmon tree. I was watching them all and they looked like they all grew around the same time. Yeah, if they're not growing after a month, you don't see any new growth on it, then it might not have taken. Like for some tropical trees, if it's not as hot, it could sit on there for up to a month. But as long as it still looks green and firm, then it's still alive. Don't give up on it right away. But if it starts to turn black or shrivel up inside the tape, then that means it's most likely dead and it didn't combine or unite with the rootstock. Let's see. Are there any questions about any questions so far on anything? Yeah.
If you have an avocado tree, especially rootstock, and the original graft failed, but the clonal base stayed green, can you cut it and then re-enter another graft to see if that works?
Yes. So the question was if you have a clonal rootstock and the graft fails and the rootstock takes over, you can graft new scions onto it. It depends on how you want it to grow. If it's growing like a bush, you could cut real low and graft multiple different varieties to the base. Or if you want it to become a tree again, cut off most of the branches and just leave one or two that you want to be the main graft. And then avocados are pretty hardy, so if you fail, it will just branch again because you can stump avocado trees and they'll just regrow. So they're very forgiving. If you mess up and it doesn't take, then don't give up. Try again because the trees will, unlike humans, we don't grow back our limbs, but the trees will. So no worries. With the fig tree, Alan's been grafting this at any chance he gets. So figs are pretty easy to graft all year round when they're dormant in the winter or when they're even fruiting. He's still been grafting till this month. So it's fine. I think figs are one of the more hardier ones to do. The mangoes and like citrus trees I've noticed have been a little bit more difficult for me. I think just the timing, you do have to make sure that it's when they're growing more vigorously. And then the deciduous fruit trees, I've really only tried in the winter time when they're dormant. So we can see, this can be our experiment, and we'll see how the persimmons do with the summer grafts. And I think, does that cover everything? Yeah.
Have you ever grafted or can you graft two different varieties of plumeria?
Yes.
Onto the same?
I am wanting to try plumerias because plumerias come in all different varieties, and I've had a customer tell me that she does graft different colors onto one because they do grow so big and take up so much space. If you want all the colors, it's better to just make a rainbow tree. So I'm waiting. I planted one rootstock plumeria with a ton of branches so that I can start doing that, but my tree is only 2 foot tall and the branches are only 6 inches. So in the future, hopefully we'll start having, grafting the plumerias, and also like some ornamental plants. Like I have outside, we have a purple alamanda vine, which is very hard to get the purple color, because if we grow the seed pods, the seeds and the flowers that they grow most likely will be white. And so I've been growing the seeds. They haven't flowered yet, but I've just been grafting the purple color flower onto the seedlings so that I get that color instead of a white color. So that's another reason why we do grafts, to get what we want instead of waiting for a plain white flower.
And is that, on that plant, is that easier than trying to root a cutting?
Yes, I've been trying to do cuttings. I've been air layering it. It has grafting air layer balls on it right now, but I've been too lazy to look underneath. So hopefully
is that the one out here?
Yeah.
Like notice leaves?
Yep, under our shade structure. Yeah, that's the purple almond. Yeah, I love it. So hopefully in the future we'll have more. Yes.
Has your experience been successful with in-ground and container plants?
Yes. Yeah, so the question is in-ground and container plants, grafting to either. They've been really both successful, I think, equally. The only advantage of grafting a container plant is you can move it around and protect it from the heat. Usually the ones that I graft in my yard, I do more lower in the middle of the canopy where it's filtered light. So it's always protected from the harsh sun in the summertime. And if it's not, like I've done mangoes in the ground in full sun, and those, if I don't cover them with a bag all the time, they just dry up. So it's best to create some kind of shade if your scion is exposed to full sun, especially in the summertime. It can just burn it or dry it out. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to end the video. Oh, one more question?
You have time or advice, or how long do you see the full without?
Oh, without grafting. So how long does the scion survive? I've gone up to about a week. It depends on if it's wrapped and protected, and sometimes I keep it in like a jar of water so that it doesn't dry out at all. It depends on the variety. Like figs can dry out pretty, like a lot for a while, and they'll still take. Which one? Mangoes, I've gone probably at most a week, but still wrapped and in a plastic bag to keep it humid without before grafting, because I know like sometimes you'll ship and you want to make sure that you ship quickly because the scions they don't always last very long. I've done Yang Mai, Miraca rubra, which is the yum berry. I shipped in some scions because I grew a seedling, and my other seedlings, I don't know what happened to them, and it needs a male and a female. So I shipped myself, I think it was from Wildlands Farm and Nursery. They sold the scions. Yeah, I got a sticker. Wildlands Farm and Nursery. They had the yum berry scions of a male and a female, and so I ordered them and they shipped. I think it was like 2-3 day shipping, and most of them took. I did like cut them in smaller pieces so that I had more nodes and fresh cuts too, and they were pre-wrapped when they sent them. So it's good to make sure, like if you are getting scions shipped, that they're wrapped or protected in some way so they're not just dry. Good question.